At the very start of the story, we find ourselves in a frozen, ice-covered region where two scientists, Julia and Oscar, are conducting dangerous experiments. Their research requires detonating bombs beneath the icy water to create controlled explosions. The moment they finish setting off a blast, their radio crackles. It's a call from headquarters. The voice on the other end warns them that an extremely dangerous storm is moving rapidly toward their location, and they must evacuate immediately if they want to survive. Not far from them, deep under the ocean's surface, a Russian submarine detects strange, loud noises through its sonar. The crew can't identify the sounds, but what truly baffles them is the way the ocean currents are moving. The water is surging upward from below, as if pushed by something massive. Back on the ice, Julia's scanners begin to malfunction, displaying strange readings. Then, cracks start racing across the ice surrounding their camp. The ground beneath them shudders violently. Julia makes a desperate attempt to grab her research papers before leaving, but the storm is almost on top of them. Oscar, realizing how little time they have left, yanks her toward their snowmobile. Meanwhile, aboard the submarine, the captain comes to a chilling conclusion. The sound isn't from machinery or shifting ice. It's coming from something alive. He orders the vessel to retreat. But before they can get far, a massive, unseen force slams into the submarine's hull. On the surface, Julia and Oscar are racing for their lives as the ice breaks apart in every direction. Then, disaster strikes. The ice ahead of them collapses, cutting off their escape route. The snowmobile, their only means of getting away, catches fire after a mechanical failure, burns completely, and sinks into the freezing water. Seconds later, a violent explosion rocks their camp, sending debris flying into the air. Trapped and helpless, the remaining scientists in the area are swallowed by the icy sea. Below, the submarine takes a relentless pounding. The force of the impacts is so strong that the crew can barely remain in their seats. Desperate, they deploy lights into the water, and what's revealed is terrifying. Enormous tentacles, each one thicker than a man's torso, writhing in the deep. Before the crew can fully react, a man slams into the glass screen from the force of an impact, then collapses unconscious to the floor. Realizing the submarine is moments away from being destroyed, an officer slams his hand onto the emergency transmission button. The distress signal is sent out just before the vessel loses all communication. At the Russian Navy headquarters, the signal is received, and it sparks immediate alarm. This isn't just any submarine. It carries crucial and highly dangerous weapons. A rescue operation is ordered, with instructions to either save the vessel and its crew or destroy it to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. The mission is to be led by Victor, the brother of the trapped submarine's captain. His family is deeply worried that he might suffer the same fate. His mother, in particular, is tense and emotional. Before he departs, she gives him a watch that belonged to his late father, telling him it will protect him and that his father's presence will always be with him. That night, Victor arrives at the docks, where he's informed that Admiral Olshansky, an old friend of his father, will be accompanying the mission. Though respectful, Victor can't hide his concern. He wonders if the Admiral's age might become a liability in such a dangerous operation. If Olshansky were to die during the mission, it might even tarnish Victor's own reputation. As soon as Victor boards the submarine, he notices the crew's frustration. Several members grumble that they were recalled from their shore leave too soon. Far away, in the middle of the storm, Julia and Oscar are still fighting to survive. Julia, distracted while trying to find a signal on her phone, almost plunges into a deep crevasse in the ice, but Oscar grabs her arm just in time. Then, suddenly, her phone picks up a weak signal from an oil rig nearby. She dials instantly, but the howling storm distorts her voice so badly that the rig workers can't understand her. Moments later, the signal dies, and the call drops. Oscar, now exhausted and frustrated, fires a flare into the night sky and then slumps onto the snow, drained of energy. The next morning, Victor's submarine reaches the coordinates where the other sub vanished. After thorough preparations, the crew submerges into the icy depths. Inside, Olshansky takes Victor to a private chamber where senior officers are gathered. A classified report is handed around. After reading it, everyone's expressions turn grim. Whispers begin circulating about what could have happened to the missing vessel. Meanwhile, Julia and Oscar stumble upon a buoy trapped in the ice, a floating device that transmits signals to nearby ships. This gives them a flicker of hope. If the buoy is still active, it could guide rescuers to them. They decide to stay put. Sure enough, the buoy's signal is soon detected by Victor's submarine, and the vessel immediately changes course to investigate. But their path is interrupted when a large pod of whales appears, surrounding the submarine. The crew tries to maneuver without harming the animals, but one whale accidentally hits the propeller. At that moment, Olshansky orders the sonar to be activated, despite Victor's objection. The sound forces the whales to swim away, but only temporarily. Within seconds, they return, agitated and unpredictable. Then, without warning, the entire pod scatters, fleeing the area. It becomes clear why. A strange, low-frequency rumble vibrates through the water, and the ocean floor itself begins to rise unnaturally. From the darkness, an enormous tentacle slithers forward, wrapping around a whale and crushing it in an instant. The crew can't hear the rumble with their ears, but the radar flares with warning. Something gigantic is heading straight for them. Believing it to be an enemy vessel, Olshansky orders an attack, but Victor urges stealth. The submarine dives into the shadows of a jagged ice wall. The hiding maneuver is risky. Every time the sub scrapes the ice, it shakes violently, and the radar sound grows painfully loud for the crew using headsets. The creature prowls nearby, but eventually moves on. When the threat passes, they discover that a solid wall of ice blocks their path forward, forcing them to surface for repairs. Elsewhere, Julia and Oscar are huddled against rocks for warmth when the ice beneath them groans and cracks. Suddenly, the submarine surfaces, and its crew rushes to meet the survivors. Even though they clearly aren't from the missing submarine, their presence sparks suspicion. Victor inspects the buoy, then reports to Olshansky. The admiral, wary of potential espionage, suggests leaving Julia and Oscar behind with some food. Victor, however, decides to bring them aboard. Once repairs are complete, the submarine dives again, moving toward the buoy's last recorded position. After a medical examination and a hot meal, Julia and Oscar are questioned. Victor shows them a map, asking about their camp and whether they witnessed anything unusual. Julia mentions the massive explosions they saw before everything collapsed. To Victor, this might explain why his brother's submarine sank. Olshansky advises turning back, warning that the unknown contact on the radar could return. If it attacked again, they might not even have time to send an emergency signal. Victor refuses. If anyone is alive on the missing sub, their oxygen is running out. Not long after, Julia hears a faint sound. Oscar identifies it as sonar from another submarine searching nearby. But before long, the radar confirms their worst fear. The monstrous creature is closing in again. This time, there's nowhere to hide, except near the oil rig Julia had contacted earlier. Victor decides to surface there. As they approach, the oil rig's workers are startled to see massive tentacles rising from the depths. Sirens blare as the creature attacks, tearing apart the massive structure. Explosions rip through the rig while terrified workers scramble for safety, but there's nowhere to run. Sections of the rig collapse into the sea. The submarine loses all communication with the rig. Victor uses the periscope and sees the horrifying destruction firsthand. He streams the live feed to the crew, showing them exactly what they're up against. Once the rig is completely gone, the monster turns its attention to the submarine. Victor orders evasive maneuvers, but the creature gives relentless chase. Olshansky seizes the moment, declaring Victor unfit for command. This, he says, is Victor's third mistake. Taking charge, he orders 2 torpedoes to be fired. Both hit, and Olshansky smirks, declaring the danger over. But moments later, an officer announces that the creature survived, and now it's even angrier. More torpedoes are fired, striking the massive body again. The submarine shakes as the explosions echo, but the creature is still alive. It charges after them, faster than before. Olshansky freezes, paralyzed by fear. Victor regains command, ordering maximum speed. The sub swerves wildly to avoid the monster's strikes, but one enormous tentacle smashes into the hull, causing serious damage. Inside, chaos erupts. Several crew members are thrown against the walls. Victor slams his head and grows dizzy. Sparks fly as computers short-circuit, and one console crashes down onto a man, pinning him to the floor. The submarine began to sink, and the monstrous creature wasted no time in exploiting their weakened state. With terrifying speed, it launched another devastating strike, shaking the vessel violently. Then, disaster, a massive explosion erupted inside the missile compartment. In seconds, thick black smoke poured out as a fierce fire raged, threatening to spread. The crew reacted instantly, shutting down the ventilation system and sealing off the compartment completely. Inside, 7 brave men stayed behind, desperately battling the flames with handheld extinguishers. But their efforts were made infinitely harder when another violent blow from the Kraken's tentacle rocked the submarine again, sending it plunging deeper into the dark, crushing depths. The radar painted a grim picture. The creature had surrounded them entirely. When the crew studied the readings closely, the truth dawned on them. This wasn't just any sea monster. It was a Kraken, a colossal, legendary beast from sailors' ancient tales, a terrifyingly enlarged relative of the modern octopus. These creatures had been the subject of myths for centuries, said to drag entire ships into the abyss. Now, that nightmare had come alive before their eyes. The crew had only a single missile left. That meant they needed to be extremely cautious about how, and when, they used it. They gathered to discuss their next move. Victor spoke up with urgency. They should switch the submarine into silent mode. Marine predators often hunt by sound, and silence might be their only shield. But that order came with a heavy cost. The men in the torpedo room would have to stop fighting the fire. As a result, carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide levels began to rise dangerously inside the sealed compartment. Meanwhile, The Kraken's unsettling, low-frequency sounds were so sharp and piercing that they sent waves of pain through the communications officer's ears. Inside the torpedo room, the trapped men began to silently question whether this would be the place they met their end. But then, Victor's gamble started to pay off. The monster's presence slowly faded, its massive form moving away into the deep. With the danger momentarily past, the crew rushed back to extinguishing the fire. Unfortunately, the blaze had already spread so far that a few small extinguishers were useless against it. Flames licked along the walls, and heat began to scorch the skin of those trapped inside. Realizing the situation was turning fatal, Victor's voice rang through the comms. "Leave it. Get out of there now. Let whatever's burning burn. Your lives matter more." Some of the officers suffered severe burns as they stumbled out, supported by their comrades. The heavy steel door slammed shut just in time, sealing off the inferno before it could consume the rest of the submarine. By manipulating the pressure inside the torpedo compartment, the crew finally smothered the flames, something they could never have done with people still inside. Afterwards, those still fit for duty were sent to repair critical damage, while the wounded were taken either to the infirmary or their quarters. Julia and Oscar pitched in without hesitation, helping to treat burns and injuries. Their selflessness earned the crew's respect and trust. Later, Victor called the crew together to ask their opinions about what to do next. The consensus was grim. Without knowing the exact location of the other submarine, and with no real defense left against the Kraken, they should retreat. At that moment, Olshansky reminded Victor of his father, a naval hero who had sacrificed himself to save others during a submarine disaster. Those words lingered in Victor's mind. After much contemplation, he reluctantly agreed they should turn back. As the submarine began its homeward journey, Victor sat alone, reading the last letter his father had ever written to him. That's when Julia entered his quarters. She noticed a few small birds inside and, surprised, asked why they were there. Victor explained that the birds were used as living oxygen indicators. If the oxygen levels dropped, they would be the first to show signs. Julia then requested a map. She carefully marked the areas where she had seen the Kraken and indicated the location of her camp. She spoke of old legends, stories of how the Kraken had attacked countless ships in the past, only to vanish suddenly, leading some scientists to believe it eventually went into deep hibernation. She theorized that the explosions they had set off earlier might have disturbed its hidden lair, waking it from its long sleep. If they wanted to survive, they needed to stop using sonar entirely, as it would only lure the beast back. Seeing how much Julia knew about the Kraken, Victor asked if she could guess where his brother's submarine might be. Julia explained that octopuses drag prey back to their lairs, and in this case, such a lair would likely be somewhere close to her camp. Their conversation was interrupted by an officer who had urgent news. He played an audio recording taken while the submarine was in silent mode. Clear, rhythmic knocking echoed through the speakers, metal against metal. Tracing the signal confirmed it was coming from near Julia's camp. That meant one thing. There were still survivors inside the missing submarine. Victor wasted no time. Gathering the crew, he declared, "Our comrades are trapped, fighting for their lives. If we don't go for them, who will? Don't think this is only about my brother. I would do the same for even one of you." His words lit a fire in the crew, and he gave the direct order to head toward Julia's camp. But before long, the vessel groaned, and nuts and bolts began loosening from the walls. Glass panels and light fixtures shattered. This was a dangerous sign. They had descended deeper than intended. They quickly adjusted their depth slightly upward to relieve the crushing pressure. Then an officer reported that they had reached an unfamiliar area. Victor ordered that a mini-submarine be deployed to scout ahead. Since the regular pilot had been injured in an earlier attack, Victor volunteered to go himself, leaving Olshansky in command of the main vessel. Victor boarded the mini-sub with 2 officers. As they descended, the metal around them creaked and strained under the intense pressure. They had never ventured so deep before. If they didn't find something soon, they would be forced to turn back. Then, a sound drew their attention. Following it, they stumbled upon an astonishing sight, a graveyard of thousands of shipwrecks lying scattered across the ocean floor. It was proof that Julia's theory and the old seafaring tales were true. Finally, they located the missing submarine. Assessing the wreckage, they saw that the front section was still intact, a good sign that survivors could be inside. They attempted to dock the mini-sub to it, but the extreme depth made the process painfully slow and difficult. After persistent effort, they secured the connection. Victor donned a diving suit and entered the wreck through the hatch. He knocked before opening it, and when he stepped inside, he was flooded with relief. The crew was alive. Among them was his brother, Alexander. The news was immediately transmitted to the main submarine, sparking celebration. Alexander revealed that they had kept their vessel in silent mode to avoid detection by the Kraken, sending out intermittent signals to avoid drawing attention. Victor began transferring as many survivors as the mini-sub could hold. They would need 2 trips to rescue everyone. He chose to remain with his brother while the first group departed, along with a mechanic. Before they left, a tracker was attached to the wreck so it could be located again, but realizing this could attract the Kraken, they switched it off. The mini-sub's departure caused the wreck to tremble once, but it held steady. The rescued crew members were brought aboard the main submarine, where treatment began. But the mini-sub's pilot wasn't fit for a second run, so Julia asked Oscar to go instead. Having previous submarine experience, he agreed. As the second trip began, Olshansky saw movement on the radar. The Kraken was on the move again. Meanwhile, Victor and Alexander made their way to retrieve the dangerous weapons their superiors had requested. They reached the destroyed section and retrieved the access codes from a safe. When they tried to enter the codes into the computer, the system initially refused to work. Victor stubbornly pressed various commands until the screen finally lit up, revealing that the weapons were still active. The signal from these weapons was picked up by the mini-sub, which then navigated towards their position. But aboard the main submarine, the mood turned grim. The Kraken was approaching fast. The crew quickly landed the submarine on the seabed and engaged silent mode. The monster hurled a massive boulder against the hull, damaging it and letting seawater seep into one compartment. Tension mounted. They could only remain hidden for so long. The mini-sub eventually reached Victor's location, but during docking, the tracker was accidentally reactivated. Just as the Kraken prepared to strike the main submarine, it detected the tracker's signal and veered toward its cave instead. Olshansky ordered the main sub to ascend immediately. In the wreck, Victor tried to reach the weapons bay through a narrow pipe partially collapsed by the Kraken's earlier attack. Alexander heard the docking sounds and urged his men to leave with the mini-sub, staying behind to wait for Victor. Finally, Victor reached the weapons room. While he began entering codes into the missiles, Alexander input commands into the computer. The arming process took precious time they didn't have. The Kraken had returned, and its massive tentacles were wrapping around the hull once again. The brothers exchanged quick words of reconciliation, apologizing for past quarrels. Then the Kraken struck, tearing away half of the submarine in a single pull. Luckily, that section was already empty. It reared back for another blow, but the brothers pressed the launch button together. As the submarine began to flood, Victor rushed back through the pipe to Alexander. The countdown to detonation had begun. The vessel was sinking fast, with torrents of water slamming through the corridors, separating them. Victor spotted Alexander's hand breaking the surface. He grabbed it and pulled his brother toward him until they were side by side again. They climbed quickly, making it into the mini-sub and sealing the hatch just in time to stop the water. But only 2 minutes remained before the explosion, and the mini-sub refused to launch. It was still attached to the wreck. Thinking fast, Victor remembered the emergency release lever. He yanked it, disconnecting them. They powered away just as the weapons detonated, sending a massive shockwave that spun the mini-sub violently in the currents. Up above, aboard the main submarine, everyone waited anxiously. Minutes passed with no sign of them. Just when hope began to fade, bubbles broke the surface, and then the mini-sub emerged. Cheers erupted. The brothers were safe, and soon they were reunited with their mother, alive, together, and victorious.